Welcome to Coffee with TruCentive, 30 minutes of incentive automation tips, tricks, and best practices. Thank you for joining today. My name is Jim Meyer, and I'll be your host. And today I want to share some insights from our customers on how they're using incentives to increase participation in meetings, events, demos, and surveys. Before we do get started, we respect your time. We'll keep this to under 30 minutes as always. Our coffees are educational, no sales pitch, no hype. They're also current. We like to talk about the things that you're interested in. So if you do have a suggestion for a future coffee with TruCentive, please feel free to send it to marketing@trucentive.com. Your questions are welcome. We'll get to as many as possible. If we don't get to them at the end of the session, we'll be sure to follow up via email. And we will have a recording of this presentation, and it will be sent out on Monday with your Starbucks coffee cards as promised. And once again, thanks so much for joining us today. Today's topics include why incentives work, how they increase the overall perceived value of your event, and how they balance the request for action, or what I like to call is the ask. I'll talk about the approaches marketers are using to enhance their existing marketing programs, and I'll show you also the most popular templates that their customers are using today, or what they're starting with to build out their incentive programs. Then I'll get into why you should let recipients choose their incentive timing with relation to events and surveys, and what works and what doesn't. And finally, I'll provide some insights at the end into the realities of the gift card economics and what you should think about when you're planning a budget for your program. So, why incentives work? Incentives work because they increase the value or the balance between the benefit a participant will receive compared to the ask you're making for that particular incentive program. The object of the incentive is to tip the balance. It's often an emotional decision, and it's very often about timing and really, do I have time to do this today versus tomorrow? Prospects should have an existing need or interest. They should be a decision maker or an influencer. And you always want to think about your incentive as that tipping point. It should not be the main reason for action. If it is the main reason for action, you're probably either targeting the wrong audience, or your incentive amount is too large and you're getting individuals coming in just for the value of that incentive. Ultimately, the goal is improving the presentation of that meeting ask by adding a little value to get that tipping point. And when you're thinking about how much you want to use for your incentive, don't think about the cost of that customer or that client. Think about the overall lifetime value, and what is that person really worth to you, either with that first incentive, or consider you might have additional incentives that you're using throughout the program. So you're going to want to consider all of those. So it can be really challenging to assess your ask's complexity. It's not just one event. If they're going to engage with you as a client or a customer, it's any follow-on activity. So we need to think about it from the perspective of, what is that client thinking when they're going to make this decision? On the left here, you can see the ask complexity. So you might have an online review that takes a lot of work. So the ask is high, and typically to balance that, you need to have a high incentive value. On the bottom axis, we see the intrinsic value to the audience. This is the value of what you're doing in this particular program. Now, some programs have very high intrinsic value. Educational webinars tend to have a lot of value. Everyone has different time constraints, so you need to consider the length of the event, the amount of work, and it can be things beyond just the amount of time they spend. Are there tough questions? Are there questions that may make a prospect uncomfortable? It's also hard to judge the intrinsic value to your audience from your perspective. You might think it has great educational value, but if it's not presented in that way, they don't see it the same way. If you're running an educational webinar, for example, and the content is applicable to the recipient, the intrinsic value can be really high. If Jeff Bezos is speaking at it, the value goes through the roof. So you really need to consider that intrinsic value and balance it with the incentive value. Now, you can also consider adding to the intrinsic value of your event. So you can see up here we have a detailed survey kind of in the middle of your screen. If we offer a report and that report is interesting to the individuals taking the survey, well, then you can increase the intrinsic value and reduce your ask complexity and the overall incentive you need to balance out to get the appropriate audience for that particular event. So I want to start off talking a little bit about meetings. When you're considering your incentive strategy, you need to look at all aspects of the meeting, the target audience, then who actually is attending that meeting, and then you need to make sure that there's a fit with regard to your message, your operations, your content, and your incentive. It's also fun to consider a theme for your meeting incentive. Recipients tend to have a slight amount of anxiety about receiving incentives, and this is because they want to be helpful, they want to be nice, and so sometimes they feel like they don't deserve an incentive. Incentives that are tied to an overall program with a theme kind of lessens the focus on the incentive and the quid pro quo and really kind of mixes it up so that they do feel more comfortable taking that incentive. Timing of the incentive is really up to you, and I'll talk more about some typical timing and some of the issues you have to consider. But when you're giving incentives, the most common scenario is a post-meeting or promised incentive. It's a thank you for doing something. It can also be a pre-meeting or prepaid incentive, and that's really common with lunch and learns. And I'm going to show you some examples in a second. And then finally, there is our live incentives where you actually provide that incentive during the meeting. And these can be really exciting, and they can also create a little chaos, so you have to consider that as well. Here are 3 examples of this approach and some of the most popular template styles that customers are starting with today to build out their incentive programs. Now, with incentives, typically you can send them via SMS message, which goes right to the recipient page, or via email to send out via the system to email your clients to give them that incentive. This is a promised example, and this one in particular is for a survey. It's a Amazon gift card as a thank you for taking the survey. Pretty simple. You select Get My Gift Card, it takes you to the recipient page, and they redeem their card. They can add it to their Apple Wallet, Google Pay, makes it very convenient to deliver on that promised incentive. And once again, this is probably the most common approach. Now, there also is prepaid examples. This is a lunch and learn, and in this case, the vendor is asking individuals to join for their lunch and learn, and on the day of the event, they send out this incentive first thing in the morning that says, please order your lunch for the lunch and learn. It's all a virtual event, of course, and they deliver, in this case, a recipient's choice approach where they have a Grubhub card, an Uber Eats, and a DoorDash card. So in this case, they have their selection of cards, and that's just because a lot of people don't have these services in their geography, so they pick the one they have, or they already have that app on their phone. So it's convenience, it reduces the friction to actually get the incentive to that prospect. Once they select that card, they can redeem it, order their lunch for delivery at 11:45 as requested, so that they're prepped and ready to go to that lunch and learn meeting. Finally, this is a live incentive delivery. And this template is for scheduling and completing a meeting. So it has a little bit more to it than what you might see in a normal live event, or whether it's a roundtable or a company meeting, but it's applicable to all other type group events. In this case, this request is to schedule a meeting. There's a button to takes the individual to a Calendarly or some online calendar so that they can go ahead and schedule that event. And then if they complete it on the day of the meeting or in the meeting, they're given the code to unlock this particular incentive. So as they click the link to enter my code, it takes them to a page, they enter the code, they get their incentive, and they get their redemption instructions and all the other things with regard to putting it in their wallet and things of that nature. So those are kind of the three types of timing examples that you can use to drive your meeting participants to the incentive. Now, incentives can be a great way to motivate for almost any type of meeting. One-on-one meetings are really common. That last example was exactly that. And you can do pre, post, or live. It's really up to you. One interesting thing about pre-delivery of incentives for meetings, you might think that people might take that incentive and go use it and never attend your meeting. It's surprisingly, in the B2B world, it's very rare. We see less than 0.5% ever redeem an incentive where they did not follow up with their promise. So while you are putting yourself out there, it's typically not a big issue if you're dealing with a professional clientele. Group meetings are very common. You probably want to give everybody the same amount with group meetings. If you too provide different amounts of incentives for group meetings, it can be challenging because people tend to talk, especially employee meetings. Another type of meeting, roundtables, these are often peers that are coming to speak on behalf of your organization. It may be to your company, or it could be at a show, whatever that might be. It's typically works best to do a post event incentive, just because very often you have different speakers that require different amounts to get them to that roundtable, and you just really want to make sure that it's all followed up after the event's over, so that when they're prepping for the roundtable, they're not talking about the incentive or the incentive amounts that they're going to receive. Another thing is you can use incentives for all hands meetings. In fact, the gated gift or the locked gift that I showed is very common. The one thing you do need to consider, if it is a company meeting, you have lots of people and you're on Zoom, if you do provide that code for that particular incentive, and by the way, you can use individual codes for each person, or you can use a global code that unlocks all of the incentives. If you're doing that and you announce the code at a meeting, be sure to prepare to have 5 to 10 minutes for people to comment, and because it creates a little chaos, which is good chaos, it's excitement, but you have to consider that it's going to take some time out of that meeting. Channel partner meetings are also another a great option for incentives. You can incentivize your channel partner to drive a meeting with a client or potential customers, or you can use incentives for both the channel partner and let the channel partner know that he has at their disposal a gift or an incentive for that particular client taking the meeting. So it kind of empowers the channel partner plus rewards them at the same time. So there's lots of meeting options, lots of great ways to use incentives through that meeting process. Now, I talked a little bit about themes because they're a great way to differentiate and add excitement to your project. Typically, they're divided into two categories, and they can be used, alone or together. You have event themes, i.e. lunch, coffee, it's a live event, live speaker, and you have incentive themes where you provide recipient choice with a group of incentives that they choose from that are all kind of themed together. Here are two scenarios that tie theme with the curated recipient choice that they have. So up top, we have a lunch and learn, which is a sales training. Once again, DoorDash, Grubhub, and Uber Eats, easy. Let them choose, they can take their pick. Down below that, we have a technology skills course graduation. They've completed the course, and this one has kind of a techie theme. But you can have all kinds of themes. You can have fine dining, you can have the technology theme I'm showing here. You can have sports themes. There's there's over 250 different gift card incentive options that you can join together to create a theme that fits your target audience. Recipients unequivocally report that they want choices. We found that adding choice to an initial ask for a program increases conversions on average by about 36%. So giving that choice works great. The choice is all about the events, so tying it to audience and messaging works really well. One thing to consider, too much choice is a bad thing. There has to be a meaningful difference between the options that you provide a recipient. If you throw 250 gift cards at them, you might think, oh, this is great, but the reality is because unless it's really distinguishable and tied to some type of theme, it just doesn't perform as well. Finally, remember the primary focus is the choice of the individual. So really consider your audience when you're preparing your recipient choice options, because you want to make sure that it is really something um, you can differentiate with and use to get their excitement and get them the choices that they really prefer. Now let's talk a bit about events. It looks like virtual events are here to stay. The good news is they're getting better as organizations gain experience. I don't know how many you have either put on events or attended events, but they definitely do have their challenges and opportunities. The good news is that there are some really fun things you can do to spice up online events and get over the Zoom fatigue. One of the biggest challenge is they're all online, so that it can be distractions at the viewer's location, whether they're at home or even in the office. You don't have a captive audience. If the UPS driver shows up, that person's very likely to go to the door and answer the door, so you don't have their full attention all the time. There's not that shoulder-to-shoulder camaraderie, and once again, as I mentioned, there's Zoom fatigue. We sit on all of these Zoom calls to learn and join these events, but it does get tiring. And by the way, thanks again for joining us today, because I do appreciate that we all spend a lot of time on these types of events. But there's lots of opportunities as well. You can emulate a lot of the characteristics of an in-person event. Incentives can be provided at every level of the program, so you can do the things that you normally do: coffee breaks, lunches, cocktail parties. You can also go beyond normal and add incentives throughout the program to add excitement. Your events don't have to be boring. You can add that excitement throughout the whole process. Some of the things you're going to normally want that you would normally do at an event: provide food just as you would your in-person events. Consider your attendees' families. Because these are virtual and they often run into the evening, remove the concern over food for the family, especially for VIPs or speakers. Coffee breaks give attendees an opportunity to address other pending issues, whether it's a UPS man or a quick call they need to make to somebody because they got an email. Encourage participation at all levels. Announce what and when you're going to be recognizing with regard to participation, so that participants are looking forward to those opportunities to get incentives throughout the day. Also, you might want to consider just throwing out random event opportunities just to keep that excitement level up. You can also recognize those who are contributing to your event. Meals during prep for the event, before the event's even started. Having breakfast available for early speakers so that they can focus on your event, their speaking engagement, not getting up in the morning and making breakfast and do all the things that they normally do for their daily routine. You can also keep your evening events. A big part of events and trade shows are those after hours events where you can talk about things offline. Encourage forming small groups hosted by your team for the virtual drinks, dinners, or they can be one-on-one or group. They can be one-on-one or group events. VIP meetings tied to an event can be more interesting than what you might find normally during the year. There's lots of event buzz, there's normal announcements and information that come out around events, and they're all great topics for discussion over drinks or dinner. So it's you can keep these events. You probably can't do them the exact same way you did them before, but if you break your team up, you can break into groups and do some really interesting things. Also, don't forget your team. Events are taxing. The one thing about events is they don't move. So everybody's stuck with a schedule and they've got to complete everything they need to do to get to that event. Whether it's prep, event, or wrap up. You show your appreciation. You might want to start each day with coffee for your team, meals for lunch, so that they can focus on all of the little things that go wrong during that event. It always happens. They've got to address people's concerns, whether that's vendors, customers, attendees. And then at the end of the event, thank them for their hard work. Close out the event with time to celebrate, maybe that's a happy hour, a dinner. Events, again, are taxing. They take a lot of effort. So, congratulate your team on your success and plan for the next event. Next, I want to just chat a little bit about demos. Demos are very similar to meetings, but the ask is usually greater. Demos are probably one of the best ways to engage with a customer. Something new that we're seeing is that organizations are taking their demos a step further, and they're adding incentives to continue the conversation after the demo. They're doing this by having either surveys about the demo. It's a great way to get that feedback about what they feel about your product, the likelihood to buy. So it's a great way to continue that conversation. You can also do it as a one-on-one post call and say, hey, I just wanted to get your feedback, and I'll give you an incentive for doing that. And sometimes people will say things in a one-on-one call versus a survey or a public demo with a group. And finally, everybody does appreciate a thank you. So if they do a demo, you might just want to follow up with that post-meeting incentive. Surveys are really interesting. They often have the greatest mismatch between the incentive and the ask. Survey questions may seem simple to us as the author, as the company providing the survey, but they can be very taxing for a client. So we need to really look at those questions, and do they cause extra friction? Do they make that survey taker uncomfortable? Their answers they may not want to give you. The most common issue for surveys is they're too long and the incentive is too small, and you just get that survey dropout. So you really need to consider how long it's going to take, inform that participant ahead of time, the length of the survey, and match that to the incentive. On the other side of the equation, if you go too big on the incentive, you'll likely attract a segment who will fill out the survey just for the incentive. So there is a delicate balance, and you do want to make sure that your audience is very well targeted, make sure that there's that good fit. Another thing you can consider is running your survey in tranches or in groups, so that you can get feedback with regard to the response rates, the data quality, as you go through that whole process. And you can take it, send out to a group, get the feedback, look at the dropout, look at the quality of the data, and then adjust your incentive accordingly. Monetary gifts are much more effective than, i.e. gift cards, than merchandise or coupons. It's just proven that individual promised is the way to go. You can also do sweepstakes. However, while you seem to save money, the reality, the ROI is typically lower than no incentive at all. So the question on sweepstakes is, they really do not work very well. In addition, you also need to consider any local or regional sweepstake laws. Different states, different counties have different laws, so you need to be really careful about when you run a sweepstake. If you're running across state lines, there's a lot of other issues. Finally, adding to the intrinsic value of a survey by offering a report when completed may be a great way to reduce that required incentive value, as I mentioned earlier. So adding survey feedback is always a great piece of content for future marketing activities. So offering it to your survey participants is just one more benefit you get from creating that particular report. Timing is important on your incentives, both on the front end and the back end of your program. Here you can see we have the initial delivery of that incentive, whether it's email or SMS, that takes them to that landing page. Then typically what we recommend is a reminder one day after your initial incentive sent. And we do this for a variety of reasons. People are just busy, but they do remember they did something. So we want to get an early reminder out. Then I recommend typically 3 reminders and then a final reminder before the expiration of your incentive. So you get that first reminder out the first day, then you go ahead and send the second reminder 3 days later, the third reminder 10 days later, and then as you set an expiration on your program, when that incentive will expire, giving someone a warning before that expiration. So if it's a 90-day program, send out on day 85 a reminder so that you can make sure that they get that one last chance to redeem their incentive. Of course, anyone who does not redeem this incentive in your expiration period, you'll get all those funds back into your account. So, it's a good news, bad news. Did they participate versus, hey, I got my money back, and the return investment per participant goes up with regard to the overall program. Finally, let's just talk a little bit about the economics of gift cards. There's a lot of different models in this industry that you should be aware of. On average, only about 80% of gift cards get redeemed. You probably have gift cards sitting in your desk drawer somewhere. Most typically, you'll find 10% delivery models, which are great for small value. It's basically 10% of the value you send, and that covers the ability to send reminders, make sure that they're redeemed, track who actually gets those incentives, who sent them, who redeemed them. So you have a full picture of what you're doing with your incentive program. And of course, if the incentive expires, you get 100% of your funds back right into your account. There's also programs that provide free delivery, but you need to be a little bit careful. As I noted, 80% of your gift cards are redeemed. Well, that means you're essentially paying 20% on every gift card that is unclaimed. Or it's 20% on your program. So you don't get that money back. There's also a third option, which is what we call cap delivery, where you can actually have a capped value on the incentive. So in maybe 10% of the value of the incentive you send, up to $3 max. You still get your unclaimed funds back, but if you're sending high value incentives, $100, $50, $1,000 incentives, you're going to make sure that you only pay that $3 per incentive sent. So really consider what type of incentive program you're most interested in. In this particular case, if you sent $10, $50 incentives, on the 10% delivery, you'd pay $450. On the free delivery, you'd pay $510. And on the capped, you'd pay $430. So it's just really up to you on what best fits your model. In closing, I just want to talk briefly about redemption rates. This is just a high-level overview of what you can expect depending on the type of your program, assuming that you are in a B2B scenario. You also should consider that about 73% of the redemptions will happen in the first 3 months. So you want to consider how long your program is going to run, the length of the expiration date of that particular incentive. If you're sending a high value thank you incentive, I'd highly recommend that you have a long period, maybe a year. If it's a normal everyday program, maybe 90 days seems, just very typical. And what that redemption rate will be across the different types of programs running, you can see here on the screen, and you can determine what is the best approach for you, and ultimately what the return on investment will be, considering the number of incentives that will not get redeemed to calculate back into the total cost of the program. So that's all I have for you today. We do have a little time for questions. Don't forget, we have another coffee coming up using incentives to invigorate your channel. So if you are a channel player, you can go to TruCentive.com/channel, and let's get to questions. First question is there a refund if they don't utilize the code? Yes, there is. You set the expiration. All incentives are wrapped up in what we call a digital envelope, and if that envelope is not opened, that prospect did not receive or actually claim that incentive. And if they go to it at a later date, it does have the expiration date, and that incentive is no longer there. Those funds automatically flow right back into your account that you can use those in another program. Next question is, what platform is being used for being able to offer gift cards from multiple places so that they can choose? Having customers all over the nation definitely poses problems for having options in their local towns. So this platform is TruCentive, that's our company, and we offer over 250 different gift card options, including virtual Visa and MasterCard. So you have that kind of generic card that you can play as well. We have time for one more question. How to size the amount of monetary incentive according to the audience level, to the position, to the region? This is a very good question, and it is a hard question. The monetary incentive obviously plays very much into who you're targeting. So if you're targeting a high-level executive and your lifetime value of a customer is high, you're going to tend to want to have a very high value incentive. We see companies like AWS and eBay, with incentives in excess of $250 for key executive meetings. So considering what you want to do, it can be as little as $5. You can run the spectrum. One of the things we do, we like to work with our customers as we get them onboarding with their program, and we'll provide as much visibility and counsel about a program and what might work for them and what we see working. We get to see lots of programs running all the time. We can't tell you who's doing what, but we can tell you kind of what is similar to your program and how we can help you be successful. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, look forward to using incentives to invigorate your channel. That's coming up on the 25th. If you do have questions, we have all our contact information here. And thank you again for joining us. We look forward to having you join us again. Take care.